Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, The Great Resignation. How does it affect your introverts? A discussion with Andrew Marsh. Andrew is an expert in Asperger's. I had a conversation with him recently and was struck by some of the parallels to the introversion issues which many organisations face. Andrew was diagnosed late in life with Asperger's, is now learning about himself and helping leaders to understand Asperger's by using his career experience and his research. Question of the week: how to recognise an introvert? This week we consider sociability, because yes, they do. Just before speaking to Andrew, COP26 and government corruption seems to have dominated the news this week, but the one other thing I've seen a lot about is the Great Resignation. Harvard Business Review and then some professional mags ran it a couple of weeks ago, and most recently even the Daily News. As people start to get more active after the pandemic, they're starting to look round at other jobs, partly because they're burnt out after the pandemic, partly because it's a big life change prompting them to look around. Let's be honest, big changes always make us reassess other things in our lives. My new underwater torch maybe need a new underwater camera, which led to new underwater camera housing and even a computer. Back to the plot. The other factor is simply the high number of vacancies being advertised at the moment. Randstad UK found that 69% of people surveyed were feeling confident about moving into a new role within their next few months, with 24% planning a change within 3 to 6 months. But here's the real problem. How long do you think it takes before a new employee is fully productive in your business? Research carried out by Oxford Economics found it takes recently hired professional workers 28 weeks to reach optimum productivity. Now, I don't know how you pay your team, but that's half a year's salary before they're productive. Add to that the month or so before the previous incumbent left when they weren't working hard, shall we say. Then there's the month while you're running around interviewing people, the month where you're looking for people to interview, and the month's notice period before you get your new person, and they're up to 10 months of reduced profits. Now, the bad news is that this is something that's not likely to change for a while yet. The good news is that means it's not too late. Not too late to be better at recognising people, showing them you care, changing some working practices to help them, and of course being more introvert friendly. The quieter members of your team are just as likely, if not more likely, to be considering leaving, and yet could be the most loyal part of your firm. That's up to a third of your employees who are introverted, where simple changes to how they're managed could make a vast difference. Here's a couple of ideas. Recognise the skills and contribution of the quieter team members. Sometimes you have to look more for them, as we're more used to seeing contributions as extrovert things. Number 2, check your firm doesn't have an extrovert bias. Publicly praise your introverts where relevant, especially in meetings. Remember to praise in public and criticise in private. And number 3, give them more space to talk. Common feedback is that introverts feel misunderstood and unwanted as they get talked over. In meetings, give them the space to answer. See, running meetings that make things happen, if you want some more ideas there. In private conversations, don't answer for them. We will, no doubt, come back to some of the themes here in the next few weeks, but now it's time to talk with Andrew about another misunderstood and yet valuable part of many teams. Did you know that about 1 in 100 people have Asperger syndrome? Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, John. Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here.
So we're going to talk a lot about Asperger's and how that affects people at work. But just before we jump into that, are you an introvert, an extrovert, and what does that mean to you?
I'd have to say I'm an introvert, mostly. And the reason I say that is that I can be quite extroverted in certain things, but I'm very much of myself, and I'm absolutely perfectly happy in my own space doing my own thing. I don't have a urgent need to always have communication with other people going on around me. I'm quite happy when there's nothing happening on the telly or it's muted for there not to be any conversation. But I find that a lot of other people think they have to fill this blank space with conversation. The introvertness is something that has been reinforced during my life, and always feeling different. It kind of made me a focus for unwanted attention, like bullying and things like that. The exceptions to that are when someone asks me a question about something that I'm really enthusiastic about, and then I will light up. I talk a lot quicker. That's when I'm talking about my writing or how I can help people with Asperger's in whatever format.
And probably listeners are spotting that at the moment. And I have the advantage of being able to see your facial expressions and how they lit up, which is brilliant. Why would an HR or a business leader want to listen to the rest of this episode?
I think it's an understanding that everyone, whether they're on the spectrum or not, has something that they can bring to employers, to the business world. People with Asperger's have amazing skills in certain areas. They can be fantastic at design, architecture, computing, science, art, music, anything creative, expressive. And because they think about things in a different way, they ask the what if questions. If you imagine yourself as a business and you had someone who was sitting there thinking, what if we looked at this in a different way? What if we did this? We're a manufacturer, we build things. We have 7 processes from raw materials at one end and we have a product at the end. What if we combine these 2 processes and we had 4 processes instead of 7? That's going to be more efficient. It uses less energy. It'll be a better way of doing something. And so you're immediately cutting out processes.
One of the benefits of managing and working much more closely and bringing anybody that's on the spectrum into the business much more closely is you will get that different way of thinking. Just before we go any further though, what is Asperger's?
Asperger's syndrome is a condition which manifests itself in the way that people interact with others. We have restrictions about communication, interaction with others, social difficulties, not reading social cues and unwritten rules of language and communication. We can find ourselves not fitting in with groups of people, with teams, with colleagues at work, with family, with friends. And it's really, they call it a disorder, and I actually don't like the word disorder. One of the clinical definitions uses the word disorder twice. I don't like that because it implies that there's something wrong with you. If you say someone's got a disorder, there's an implication that there's something wrong with them. When if you actually took the time to talk to them about what they really love doing and engage with them with that and entice it out of them, you will find that they are passionate about certain things. It might be computing, coding, it might be gaming, it could be anything, and they will be absolutely passionate about it, probably more so than a neurotypical person, because it will be their driving focus for what they do when they're not working, unless that is their work. One of the great things with people with Asperger's is that some of them, and I'm not one of them, are fantastic at computer coding and seeing patterns in numbers. So they're brilliant in IT applications because it's like they think the language. That's the best way that I can describe it.
About difficulty in relating to others socially and perhaps behaviorally, and thinking patterns perhaps towards the coding end of the world, if I can put it like that. And
yes.
I couldn't have helped miss, while you were talking about the difficulty in relating with others and am I different, with something a lot of introverts say to me. Do you think that there's any connection between the two? Are there extroverted Asperger's sufferers, or is it?
I think there are. I mean, when you look at big business, people like Steve Jobs was believed to have Asperger's, and he was quite happy on the stage talking to thousands of people about his new product because it was passionate. It was his thing. He came up with the idea to create, if you go back to 2007, a small handheld phone that was a phone and you could send text messages, and that was it. He then decided, he thought, well, what else can I do with this handheld device? I can put the power of the computer and the internet onto it. And at a moment in time, he put the 2 things together. And so if you were to look back at some of the speeches that he gives, oh yeah, he's very passionate about it. He's absolutely in the zone of, I want to convey to people how wonderful this product is, and the asking the what if questions. What if I put this with that? What if we did that? What if I looked at this in a different way? And that's one of the strengths of people with Asperger's, is we're not constrained by normal conventional thinking. What happens? What happens if I do this? What if I do that?
And lots of persistence, and you touched on the detail perhaps that many people have.
Yeah.
I do see many similarities, but definitely not the same thing. And neither would it be fair to say all Asperger sufferers are introverted. On the spectrum, what does that mean?
It's quite interesting. Asperger's is a spectrum. It's not just linear from 0 to 100%, and that's it, one single line, like a kebab skewer. Kebab skewer's got a blunt end, say it's 0%, and it's got a sharp end, 100%. If you put a kebab skewer through a grapefruit, you'd have about a third of it sticking out at one end, a third of it in the grapefruit, and a third of it sticking out the other end. Imagine that was one trait of Asperger's syndrome. Imagine you had 10 kebab skewers through your grapefruit, or 100 or 1,000, and that every single person on the spectrum with Asperger's syndrome fits somewhere differently on every one of those 1,000 skewers, so that they'll be good at some things, they'll be less good at other things, and there'll be a whole range of characteristics, traits, and abilities where they'll sit somewhere in the middle range, in the central range.
And that must make it very difficult to spot. If I'm a leader, I've got a team of 100 people in my business, and I don't know, one or two of them are somewhere on the spectrum. It must be really hard to spot.
It can be difficult to spot, but what you will tend to find is you will have people in your organization that will say, be careful about when you go and speak to Andrew. He's a bit sharp and he doesn't like being interrupted. Or there'll be people that will say, when I last spoke to him, he really didn't understand what I wanted and he didn't deliver what I wanted from him. And so there will be reactions. There'll be behavior that other people notice about you in business, you at work, that might make them think, he's sticking out because of this or that. Those are two things that he does that are different from everyone else. That might lend you to want to investigate a little more and inquire as to whether someone is on the spectrum.
So when you hear reports or you notice that some people act differently, then it's worth asking yourself that question.
Yeah.
What should you look for next? And then what should you do as a result of that?
The sensible thing to do would be to have a mature adult conversation with that person and their line manager and say, we've noticed that you struggle sometimes in your relationship with other people in the team, or we've noticed that sometimes there's been a reaction when someone's asked you something and you've been interrupted. How can we help you do things better so that you're more efficient at your work and we're having less of these conflict points? Because HR people will only really ever realize there's a problem when there's a conflict in the business. And that will usually be someone's being identified as being difficult. That's how it generally starts. It's recognizing that there's different traits from these people and to have a conversation with them. Say, we've noticed these things. How can we help you?
And that will help you to identify ways to manage.
Yeah.
One of the things you talked about earlier when we were off air, office politics.
The way that I viewed it is I've always, when I've been given a piece of work to do, want to do that piece of work, to give it back on time in a good quality. If I've got any questions, I'll ask. But then you get the deliverable at the end of it. The office politics thing was I didn't get the subtleties of 3 or 4 people at about the same level. Eventually, after you've been there a few years, you're going to think, well, 1 or 2 or 3 of us is going to get promotion in some way. I never saw the need to have idle chit chat with my colleagues, those above me and those above them, to ingratiate myself with them, to think, look at me, I'm good, I'm talking to you, we're having a conversation. And by the way, do you know that these people that are in my team, they're not doing things very well, and giving examples that you have picked out or you've completely made up. You don't know.
You avoided a lot of the small talk.
Absolutely. I very much am not a small talk person. I wouldn't be standing around the photocopier having that bit of chit chat. To me, that was unnecessary. If I needed to go to the kitchen, make a cup of tea, I'll go and make a cup of tea and I'll come back. I wouldn't be particularly interested in what was on Strictly last night or what happened on EastEnders or Coronation Street. But that was their way, I found out, I'll will this out later, that was their way of having these sort of mini political conversations setting hierarchies and structure up so that other people knew who was alpha and who was beta.
When you got diagnosed, what difference did that make to your life?
The big word for me is understanding, because I now understand and know why I'm different. Always known I was different, but didn't know why. And so having a diagnosis, having a name to the way that I interact around other people meant that I could understand it by researching it. And actually, as I'm talking to you, I have just behind the screen, there's a list of the 12 positives of Asperger's. And I always have that with me because I find it refreshes me and it makes me think, you are good at that, and you are good at that, and you are good at that.
Pick for me the biggest two strengths.
Focus. I'm absolutely focused on when I'm doing something. If you've given me something to do, bang, that's it. No distractions, no playing around on your phone with what's on Facebook. Focus, do that thing. And the other one is creativity. I love asking the what if questions.
What would you say was the biggest one negative thing?
I can be very hard on myself. I can be very, as we said off air, I can be very happy in my own space and not have the need for chit chat and with friends and family. I'm quite happy sitting in the silence.
And therefore you get left out a bit.
I get left out and I get called antisocial. Andrew, you're not in the group. You're not in the group. Come on.
I know lots of introverts that immediately go, oh, yes. They feel just the same for that. Could you give us one tip for perhaps an introverted manager who suspects he's got an Asperger's member on his team? One tip to manage them more effectively.
Understand what it is you're asking them to do. When you're having a conversation with giving them a piece of work, use open questions.
And if I was an extroverted manager and I had somebody on my team that may be on the spectrum somewhere, how might I improve the way I manage them?
Almost do the opposite. And you try and ask closed questions.
It's been wonderful talking to you, and I'm sure that some people listening will want to get back in touch with you. What's the best way to do that, Andrew?
Well, they can visit my website, which is andrewmarsh.co. Yes, just .co. Having realized I've got Asperger's and I've got 57 years of life experience, I can now relate a lot of my Asperger's traits to my work career and life experience, and I can put things into context to help others.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
A moment to ask for your help, please. It would make a huge difference to me if you'd stop listening. But just for a moment. Yes, only enough time for you to go and give a review for this show on your podcast platform. So, press pause, go to Apple Podcasts or wherever and write a short review. Hopefully that'll be 5 stars. What would you like to know about introversion in business? This week's question comes from Andy. I've been exploring it over the last couple of weeks. How do you spot an introvert, as they tend to hide in plain sight? They're like cuttlefish, who I adore. Cuttlefish change colour to blend in with the environment and hide in plain sight. Introverts can blend in, as many people view introverts in business as a bad thing due to the extrovert bias, and that can make it hard to manage them effectively because you can't spot them. So this week's tip, sociability, because yes, introverts do like to socialise. That alone shocks many people. But if you have a team member who is much more comfortable and social with people they know, that could be another small clue. Use it in conjunction with the others. Speaking of things in disguise, did you see the news item this week about the purebred puppy who turned out to be a fox? Maribel Soleto bought a puppy from a small shop in central Lima, Peru. They called their dog Run Run. He initially played happily with the other pet dogs in the neighbourhood. But as he grew up, signs emerged that something wasn't quite right. Run Run loved to chase and kill ducks and chickens, which rather annoyed the local community, and Run Run turned out to be an Andean fox. So, I'm not saying that introverts with bushy tails are foxy, but who knows? What question would you like answered on the show? Whether you want to be on the show or just have your question answered, go to activateyourintrovert.co.uk, where there's a box for you to ask your question. You could also follow on Facebook and discuss the answers at your show's page. Activate your introvert.
I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintrovert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.